All right, everybody. Final study questions, very exciting in intermediate macro. Once again, we're going over this because of the fact that this is a very popular model. It is more along the lines of what policymakers would be thinking, so that's useful for you to know. And it's just kind of interesting from the standpoint of how someone can read the same book and come up with different conclusions about what the author has said. Now, here's the other page. All right. So all we've got left is, let's see, back up a little more. Nasty looking graph, and then a few words on the next page. All right. So here we go. Let's finish this up. So this is all going to be stuff about the ISLM apparatus and how it works. And I think maybe you'll see why it's so popular with instructors, because you end up getting the talk sort of distinctly about monetary policy and fiscal policy. Again, this is what I learned when I was in school, and it's still taught today. It's not as if it's something that died out in the 80s, kind of like baggy or the shoulder pads and what else? The fluffed out hair. What do you call that? See, I need Melanie here right now. I don't know stuff like that. But anyway, so it's something that didn't die in the 80s. All right, so the next study question is, and I think I'll pull this up on the board here, or on the TV. TV. Well, I have the computer hooked up to this television set. Sorry, I didn't think to do this until just now, or I would have already had it up there. And there's my password. Okay. So let's go back to where we are in terms of the study questions. We just did 111 and 112. Now we're going to go through. So we set up the curves, right? We set up the model, and that's all we've got left. This page right here. Let me push up just a little bit so that's more centered. There we go. That's all we've got left. 113 through 118. 113 is going to say what shifts the IS curve and what sort of policy is it generally used to represent. What shifts the LM curve and what sort of policy is it typically used to represent. Then, so those two there are going to be, and it's basically going to be fiscal policy and monetary policy. So we'll say a little bit more than that about it, but fiscal policy for the IS curve, monetary policy for the LM curve. And again, that's why it was such a popular classroom tool. Here, now we're going to use fiscal policy. Let's see what happens. Now we'll use monetary policy. Then 115 and 116 sort of go together. IS says what happens to the IS curve as the investments function becomes more interest sensitive. What happens to the LM curve as the money demand function becomes more interest sensitive. So we want to talk about what changes the slopes. All right. Let me go back up to the top here. Here we're explaining the two curves, IS, LM. What kind of policy do they represent? What determines the slopes? And then when are particular policies more effective? So these they come in pairs, each of these last questions that are matched on first IS, well, not necessarily first every time, but one on IS and one on LM. So here's the next one. The next one is what shifts the IS curve and what sort of policy is it generally used to represent? Okay, I'm going to write the answer up here. 1, 1, 3, period. The IS curve, and then I'm going to do a little explanation that is not part of the answer. The IS curve shifts to the, I should have got two chairs. It's nice and stable right here where it's against the back of the chair, but anyway. It's, that ship has sailed, John. Shifts to the RIGHT whenever G, or Autonomous I, that used to be my rapper name, Autonomous I, rises, or T falls, and vice versa. And fiscal. All right, so the question was, what shifts the IS curve, Well, the IS curve shifts to the right whenever government spending or investment rises. I'll tell you what I mean by autonomous investment here in just a moment. Or taxes fall. And it's going to shift to the left whenever government spending or autonomous investment falls or taxes rise. And then the second part of the question was, what sort of policy is it generally used to represent? Fiscal policy. That's why we've got fiscal policy, because we've got government spending and taxation, all right? So whenever we change government spending or taxation, we shift the IS curve. Let me show you why. All right, so what I'm about to do is not part of the answer. That's the whole answer. That's all you have to have on 113. But of course, as always, it's good if you understand what the heck you're writing. So, pardon me, here's the actual explanation. Let's see, Y, R, and so we have this IS curve right here, all right? Now, autonomous investment is simply investment, oops, I just wrote on myself, investment not related to changes in the interest rate, because Hicks does recognize that investment can change even without a change in the interest rate. For example, let's say that something like coronavirus happens. Then even without a change in the interest rate, investment's going to fall. Contrasting, let's say that another very serious scenario, aliens visit our planet and give us wonderful new technologies. Hey, let's invest more. All right, so investment goes up without even a change in the interest rate. Autonomous means independent. Independent of what? Independent of the variable that we said it was a function of. We said it was a function of R, so autonomous investment. So you could come up with a scenario where, let's say that coronavirus happens, then the whole curve would shift, and it's not just a change in investment because interest rates changed. It's a change in investment regardless of the interest rate. But I want to focus more on G and T here, all right? And let's say that government spending goes up. We started at this point right here, R sub 0, Y sub 0. Investment was equal to savings, although actually if we're going to do, again, you can do a whole semester on this. If we're going to add in government spending and taxes, we really now have the IS curve, and plug your ears up if you don't want to hear this. The IS curve is now really I plus G equals S plus T, but pretend I didn't say that. Just think of it this way. Here's a real simple way to do it, because we're only doing just a touch of the ISLM curve stuff. All you have to think to yourself is, hey, if there's an increase in government spending, the economy is going to expand, all right? Even without a change in the interest rate, the economy is going to expand, so what's going to happen is, an increase in government spending or a cut in taxes will shift the whole curve to the right. Now, so investment has stayed the same. How do I know? Because we didn't change the interest rate. And I didn't bring up anything with it. Again, as I say, in my example, it's still part of the answer, but in my example, let's not even think about that. Let's just talk about changes in government policy. That even without a change in investment, the increase in government spending or the cut in taxes is going to cause the economy to expand. So investment is still at the same rate. I know this because it's a function of the interest rate and I didn't change the interest rate. And yet still, the economy is at a higher level of GDP because government spending went up or because taxes went down. And guess what? If you lower them, it goes the opposite direction, right? So that's all this one's about. Well, as always, the LM curve is going to be somewhat more tedious, but here we go. Poor Melanie. She teaches 4th grade, and their school is out until April, and she doesn't. I'm still teaching, right? So I've got lots of stuff to do. I've been working on a paper as well in between. Alex is home. She's actually still in law school, so she's working on a paper right now. Melanie doesn't really have anything to do. So we're trying to go out and do some things with her and so forth, but she's starting to go insane. So anyway, we've locked away all the guns, and so hopefully she'll be fine. Now, 114. what shifts the LM curve, and what sort of policy is it generally used to represent? Fascinating question, John. Let me first write out the answer, and then I will explain the answer. 1, 1, 4. That's not a very good pen. You're certainly paying more tuition than warrants a crappy pen like that. The LM curve shifts. I wrote here, shifts to the down. Okay, the LM curve shifts down, not shifts to the down, you idiot. Whenever M rises, and vice versa. Period. Monetary. All right, so that's the entire answer. You need to say no more than that, but of course now let's go through it to make sure that you understand it. What shifts the LM curve? Changes in the money supply. So this is why it's monetary policy. And again, this is why classroom instructors like this model, because they can go through and say, hey, okay, here's fiscal policy with the IS curve, here's monetary policy with the LM curve, and you're going to see even more about this in just a moment. But let me show you why these changes in the money supply would shift the curve in the manner that I have suggested. Again, this graph here is not part of the answer. The answer is already complete. I'm just giving you an explanation so you can understand what you said. And I started to say it makes the answer easier to remember, but this semester that's kind of beside the point. But in future semesters, if I use this video again, it will be relevant. All right, here is an LM curve. Remember, it's setting out all the points where the supply of money is exactly equal to the demand for money. All right, and let's mark that here. All right, let's see here. How do I want to do this? Because it gets complicated with this one because there's so many letters. M0 equals L0, oh crap, which is equal to LT, oh sorry, sub 0 plus LS sub 0. Okay, so there's that point right there. Again, this is not part of the answer. I'm just trying to get you to understand what we're talking about. Whew. Now, let's see, how do I want to explain this one? If we increase the supply of money, then the whole thing's, well, okay, there's a very simple way to think about it. If we increase the supply of money, then think about this. Remember that the bank is trying to balance the demands of the LT people versus the LS people. They've only got so much money to split up between them. Can you see that? Yeah. Only so much money to split up between them. That's what we were arguing earlier, is that when GDP went up, causing this to go up, banks had to find a way to drain income from this side and go over there. And how did they do that? They raised interest rates. They raised interest rates, which caused these speculative demand people to go ahead and deposit their money in CDs and whatever, and that money was then available for the LT people to use. So the bank's goal here is to balance these two. Well, what if we suddenly introduce more money into the system? Now the bank doesn't have to offer as high an interest rate to these people right here in order to induce them to give up enough cash for them to use. All right? So we've introduced more cash into the economy. And the whole curve shifts down. Even at the same level of GDP, they don't have to offer as much interest anymore to those LS people. They don't have to offer as much interest anymore to those speculative demand people. So screw you, we're not offering as much interest. There's more money out there, so we can more easily supply funds to these people here without worrying about getting it from you because the government increased the money supply. And then the opposite, of course, if they lower the money supply. Okay, what do we got? 4 questions left. All right, here comes 115. Now, 115 and 116, as I said, are about the slopes of the lines. What would make one of the lines steeper? What would make it flatter? And this turns out to be really key to the following 2 study questions. Yay! I'm 4 study questions away from a beer. As Homer Simpson would say, beer. All right. Another drink of water. And 116. But let me talk about it first, all right? Rather than just, 115. Let me talk about it first rather than write the answer up on the board here, because I think that's going to be the more logical way to do this one. And the question is, when is the IS curve steeper versus flatter? We'll call it IS prime, right? Because this is going to be significant in the last 2 study questions in thinking about whether or not monetary policy or fiscal policy would be more useful in a given scenario. So, the question says, 115, what happens to the IS curve as the investment function becomes more interest sensitive, and why? All right? And remember the investment function. All right? So, as firms become more interest sensitive, as they become more and more willing to change their decision given a change in the interest rate, the IS curve, and this is interesting. Students often get the, if I ask it in class, they often get the answer exactly backwards. All right. And if I ask it on the exam, so think carefully about this. Which of these 2, the steep one or the flat one, shows a situation where entrepreneurs are particularly interest sensitive? All right. Are particularly interest sensitive. The steep one or the flat one? Which one shows a bigger change in investment given a change in the interest rate? And let's check it out. How about them Vols? Hey, I got a sort of a Halloween coloring here. R sub 0, and we started off at R sub 0, Y sub 0. And by the way, if you're in any class and they're asking you to compare 2 situations like the slopes, it's always handy. You know, I'll ask a question like this as a held question, and I'll see people draw 2 graphs. No, put them on the same graph and start them at the same point. And then you get a really direct comparison in what happens in the 2 situations. Okay, so let's lower the interest rate, and let's see, I think I'll use a couple more colors here, just because I have them. Right, let's go here. All right, here's my question. When we cut the interest rate from R0 to R1, which of the 2 scenarios, the flat IS curve or the steep IS curve, showed a situation where entrepreneurs were like, oh my God, did you read the paper? They cut the interest rate. Let's build 10 more franchises. As opposed to the one where they said, yeah, they cut the interest rate again, who gives a crap? Because there's, I don't really care that much about interest rates. Notice how much GDP rose on the flat one. That is the extremely interest-sensitive curve. When the interest rate fell, entrepreneurs reacted tremendously. That's a Donald Trump word. Tremendously here on the flat curve. GDP rose from Y sub 0 to Y sub 2. Why? Because investment went up so much. All right? Investment skyrocketed on the flat curve. Entrepreneurs were so delighted that interest rates fell that they jumped up in investment. On the steep one, they're like, it's better than R sub 0, but R sub 1 is not like going to make me go, build 10 new franchises. It's not that big a deal. So the steep one is the very interest insensitive curve as far as the investment function. And the flat one is the very interest sensitive curve. And you can tell because the decrease in interest rate elicited a much bigger change in investment and therefore a much bigger change in GDP on the flat curve. That's all it's asking. So let's write that answer out. To read the question again. What happens to the IS curve as the investment function becomes more interest sensitive? Okay, I'm going to answer that part first. It becomes flatter. Period. Sorry, that's among the worst flatters ever written. And why? This is so because entrepreneurs care more about what? Entrepreneurs. Good thing I took 4 years of French. Care more about what R is, or you can write the interest rate. R is when they undertake I decisions. Not done yet. One more sentence. Or investment decisions. You can write investment if you want to. You can write I. Right? Investment decisions. Here's the last sentence. Thus, and this is what we just demonstrated on the graph. Thus, for the same fall in R, in the interest rate, comma, a flatter IS yields a bigger jump in investment, increase in I, and therefore a bigger increase in Y. That's the answer. We demonstrated that on the graph just a second ago. What happens to the curve, the IS curve, when the investment function becomes more interest sensitive? It flattens out. Well, why does that happen? Well, because what's happening is entrepreneurs are becoming they care more about what interest rate is when they undertake the investment decisions. And thus, and you give an example here to drive the point home, thus, for the same fall in R, which is exactly what we just illustrated, a flatter IS yields a bigger jump in investment and therefore a bigger jump in GDP. So, a flatter IS curve gives a bigger jump in GDP when there's a fall in the interest rate. All right, 116, 3 to go. Unfortunately, these next 3 are a little longer. All right, 3 to go. Similar question about the LM curve, about interest sensitivity. All right. What happens to the LM curve as money demand becomes more interest sensitive, and why? All right, so same thing as the other one. Well, let's have a look at that. Get rid of that little stray mark there. Y, R. Oh, I should draw a steep one and a flat one, shouldn't I? I shouldn't do that. So I can have a comparison. I mean, that would have worked, but why do like a 45-degree line when you can do a steep one and a flat one? All right, let's see. Do I want to do it this way or do I want to drop the interest rate? No. This is good. This is good. Okay. All right, check this out. Now, remember that the money supply is fixed. That's not going to be the issue. The problem is distributing the limited supply of money between those who want to hold it for transactions purposes and those who want to hold it for speculative purposes. And that's driven by Y, and that's driven by R, right? The higher the interest rate is, then the more I don't really want cash. I'll just get bonds or put my money in CDs or whatever. I hope the battery on this sucker is okay. The microphone is a really good microphone, but the battery dies. And I would hate to not get through this whole video here when we're so close to the end. So I should just shut up. All right. So let's say we start here. And actually, okay, R sub 0, Y sub 0. Actually, I should stop and say, when it says the LM curve is becoming more interest sensitive, it's really just that, right? I mean, the only part of the LM curve that has anything to do with interest is the speculative demand for cash. So if something about the demand for cash is becoming more interest sensitive, it's just that part, right? So think about that. That's going to be kind of neat. All right, let's say that for whatever reason, and I'm going to have to draw this because I drew this sucker awfully steep. For whatever reason, GDP rose, I wasted a lot of space, sorry about that. GDP rose to Y sub 1. So therefore, there was an increase in the transactions demand for cash, all right? GDP rose to Y sub 1, so therefore there's an increase in the transactions demand for cash. Well, what do we got to do here? We have a fixed supply of cash, so we have to find some way to get those people to give up their cash so that they can have it. I'm the banker. I'm going to be loaning money to these people and getting it from these folks over here by paying them interest, right? And so, as a consequence, I'm going to have to raise the interest rate. So we can already see that. We can already see the interest rate's going to go up. But on one of the curves, the interest rate's barely going to go up. R sub 1. In fact, so barely that I almost have it on top of R sub 0. On the other one, oops, let's make it R sub 2. Interest rate's going to have to go massively high, all right? This is what's going on. This is what's going on. Okay, once again, GDP went up. Therefore, the transactions demand for cash rose. So the financial system is going to have to draw cash away from those people who hold it for speculative reasons and get it to the people who hold it for transactions reasons. How do they do that? They raise the interest rate. But the more interest sensitive these people are, the more interest sensitive they are, the less you have to raise the interest rate. Because when you're extremely interest sensitive, oh my God, they raise the interest rate from 4% to 4.1%. I'm going all into bonds. Well then, the bank doesn't have to raise the interest rate that much to pull the cash away from the LS people and get it to the LT people. Whereas when they're interest insensitive, which is the steep curve, and so it turns out that the flat curve once again is the interest sensitive and the steep one is the interest insensitive, which is handy because it means that both the IS and LM have the same answer on the first part. The flat one is the interest sensitive one. On the steep one, they're very interest insensitive. The bank is raising the interest rate from 4 to 4.1 to 4.2 to 4.3 to 4.4 to 4.5, trying to get these people to give up their cash so they can get it over here. They're having to raise the interest rate much more because they're interest insensitive. They have to see a bigger change in the interest rate to induce them to change how they're holding their savings, all right? So the interest sensitive curve, the flat one, required only a small increase in the interest rate to induce the LS people to buy bonds, to buy CDs or whatever, that the bank could then use that money to finance or to help these people down here finance their transactions. So once again, similar answer. So that's the graphical explanation. Now let me write the answer out for you, okay? You don't have to have the graph for the answer. In fact, you shouldn't. You should have this. 116. Oh my God, we only go to 118. All right. 116. What happens to the LM curve as money demand becomes more interest sensitive? Let's answer that part first. Nice and easy. Yeah, it reminds me of a Frank Sinatra song. The LM curve becomes flatter. All right, what happens to the LM curve as money demand becomes more interest sensitive? It becomes flatter. Why? Okay, this one's a little bit more tedious as the LM curve always is. So, here's the explanation. Recall that M is, I'm horribly tempted to try to fit exogenous over there, but I don't think it's happening. I don't want to take up that much space. Exogenous. How did that fit? Nicely. All right, exogenous. Therefore, along the LM curve, and this is just a summary of what we just did, so if you followed that, then this is just summarizing all that. Therefore, along the LM curve, any change, any delta, LT, must be exactly offset by, guess what? Delta LS, which is what I was just showing. If the transaction demand goes up by 10, then the speculative demand must go down by 10, and so on. When the latter, and you know, I had a student tell me one year, you use ladder and former too much, and he was absolutely right. In fact, I just did a new edition of my Contending Perspectives book, and one of the things I did was Control F for ladder and former and change as many of those as I could. So I'm going to do it right here. What I did have before was when the latter, but now I'm going to say when LS. When LS is more interest sensitive, is more R sensitive, it means that it requires a smaller change. It means that it requires a smaller change in R to compensate, because those holding cash, to compensate, because those holding cash for speculative purposes take note of even small changes. Almost done. Take note of even small delta R, even small changes in the interest rate. Thus, for example, here's your last sentence. Thus, for example, in the face of a given rise in LT, in the face of a given rise in LT, a flatter LM means that the rise in R necessary to release cash, necessary to release cash for transactions purposes can be very small.